There are men who rule for power, and there are men who rise for purpose. Among the countless rulers who have walked the earth, few have left a mark as deep and everlasting as Alexander the Great. Born in a small kingdom, yet destined for a world without borders, his story is not just about wars and conquests. It is about vision, discipline, and the relentless pursuit of destiny. From the dusty fields of Macedonia to the grand empires of Persia and India, he carried within him a flame that no storm could extinguish. His heart was not driven by greed, but by the belief that greatness is achieved when a man dedicates his life to something larger than himself. This is not just history, it is a journey of faith, courage, and moral triumph that continues to inspire generations. Before he became Alexander the Great, he was a young dreamer, mocked by many, doubted by most, but guided by an unshakable belief. I will not rest until I have achieved what others call impossible. When the world told him to stay within limits, he created a world without them. When defeat seemed certain, he rose from the ashes of battle and turned loss into legacy. His journey proves one timeless truth, that true victory does not come from conquering lands, but from conquering fear, doubt, and the voice that says you can't. Every scar he earned was a verse in a story written by destiny itself. Alexander's story begins long before his first battle. It begins with destiny. Born in 356 BC in the ancient kingdom of Macedonia, Alexander came into a world filled with ambition and tension. His father, King Philip Roman II, was a brilliant strategist who dreamed of uniting all of Greece, and his mother, Queen Olympias, instilled in him a sense of divine purpose. From his earliest days, Alexander was not raised as an ordinary child. He was taught that greatness required more than power. It required discipline, knowledge, and purity of heart. Even as a boy, he displayed an unusual curiosity about the world, asking questions far beyond his age, as if his soul already knew he was meant for something extraordinary. He grew up surrounded by stories of heroes and kings who had changed the world through courage and conviction. The tales of Achilles and the wisdom of old philosophers shaped his thinking. Yet, it was not the glory of war that fascinated him, but the courage of the human spirit. He wanted to understand what made men brave, what made them loyal, and what made them rise even after defeat. This mindset set him apart from other princes who sought comfort and luxury. Alexander sought understanding. When he was a young boy, his father brought home a wild horse named Bucephalus. No one could tame it. The animal threw every soldier who tried to ride it. But Alexander, instead of being afraid, observed it closely. He noticed the horse was frightened by its own shadow. With calm and confidence, he turned the horse toward the sun so it could no longer see its shadow, and mounted it successfully. That moment revealed his natural leadership. A leader who didn't conquer by force but by insight. Even his father, astonished, said, "My son, seek a kingdom greater than Macedonia, for that is too small for you." As Alexander grew older, his education became the foundation of his greatness. His father chose none other than Aristotle, one of history's greatest philosophers, to be his teacher. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander learned about logic, ethics, science, and the moral responsibilities of leadership. He was taught that the world operates on justice and wisdom, not merely strength. Aristotle also emphasized self-control, humility, and the importance of learning from all cultures. These lessons deeply shaped Alexander's approach to leadership later in life. While many princes relied solely on their armies, Alexander relied on his mind. He studied the stars, maps, and ancient records of past empires. He analyzed how leaders rose and how they fell. His goal was not to repeat their mistakes. He once said that he would rather excel in knowledge than in the size of his empire, a statement that reflected the purity of his ambition. For him, conquering ignorance was the greatest victory of all. Even in his teenage years, Alexander began showing signs of remarkable maturity. He respected the elders, listened carefully to wise men, and treated his soldiers with kindness. Unlike many royals, he was not arrogant. He ate simple food, trained hard, and spent hours on horseback. He practiced discipline every single day because he believed a king who cannot control himself cannot lead others. This personal discipline became the armor that would later protect him in the chaos of war. When his father began uniting Greece, Alexander often accompanied him to meetings and battles. He watched, he learned, and he remembered. He saw how diplomacy could win without swords, and how pride could destroy peace. These observations became lessons that shaped his understanding of leadership. He understood that ruling was not just about power, but about earning the respect and trust of others through justice and wisdom. There were moments when Alexander questioned his own destiny. The road to greatness was not easy. He often faced jealousy from others, doubt from elders, and the enormous pressure of living up to his father's name. Yet every challenge strengthened his resolve. He learned that leadership is not given. It is earned through patience, faith, and sacrifice. He developed an unshakable belief that the Almighty had placed him on earth for a purpose larger than himself. As he entered manhood, Alexander's heart burned with a vision of uniting nations that were divided by fear and greed. He believed that true greatness was not in conquering others, but in teaching them to live in peace. This belief gave him both strength and humility. His dream was not to become the most feared ruler, but the most respected one whose name would be remembered not for destruction, but for wisdom and unity. By the time he was 20, the foundations of his greatness had already been laid. The combination of wisdom from Aristotle, the courage of his father, and his own spiritual strength made him a leader destined for history. But even at that young age, Alexander understood something that most men never do, that victory begins long before the battle, in the heart of a disciplined soul. After the death of King Philip Roman II, the young Alexander faced the greatest test of his life, the burden of the crown. He was only 20 years old, yet the weight of an entire empire rested on his shoulders. The moment his father was assassinated, chaos erupted across Macedonia. Rivals whispered that Alexander was too young, too inexperienced, too untested to rule. Neighboring states rebelled, thinking this was their chance to break free. The throne that once seemed like his birthright suddenly looked like a trap. But Alexander did not panic. His heart remained steady, his eyes calm, for he knew that storms reveal the strength of the mountain. Instead of reacting with fear, Alexander acted with clarity. He quickly gathered his generals and addressed them with confidence and faith. His voice was steady, his resolve unshaken. "We will not lose what my father built," he declared. "We will protect it, and we will expand it." His men saw in him not a boy, but a king. That was the first time Alexander's leadership truly came alive, not through inheritance, but through his ability to inspire courage in others. The days that followed were filled with trials. Rebel factions within Greece began to rise, testing the young king's patience and discipline. Instead of showing anger, Alexander showed wisdom. He did not rush into battle blindly. He observed, strategized, and struck with precision. When Thebes, one of the strongest Greek cities, revolted against him, Alexander marched his army with incredible speed, covering distances no other army could. His arrival shocked his enemies, and within days he restored order. His discipline, swiftness, and strategy sent a clear message. The new king was not one to be underestimated. The victory at Thebes was not just a military triumph, it was a psychological one. It re-established Macedonia's authority and proved Alexander's capability as a ruler. The Greek states, once divided, now respected him. Even the elders who had doubted his strength began to recognize that Alexander possessed not just his father's courage, but a deeper kind of wisdom, the kind that made soldiers follow him out of loyalty, not fear. He had earned his kingdom not through inheritance, but through action. Yet, this early success did not make him proud. On the contrary, it made him more humble and thoughtful. After securing Greece, Alexander spent nights in prayer and reflection, thinking about the responsibilities of leadership. He reminded himself that power without purpose is dangerous. His victories were not a sign of his greatness, but of his duty, a responsibility to rule with justice, humility, and courage. He believed that every blessing comes with accountability before the Almighty. Once Greece was stable, Alexander turned his attention to his father's unfulfilled dream, the conquest of the vast Persian Empire. It was the largest empire in the known world, stretching from Asia Minor to India. Many thought such a goal was madness for a young king, but Alexander saw it differently. He viewed it not as a war of greed, but as a mission to unite civilizations. He believed that through understanding, honor, and discipline, nations could be brought together under a rule of fairness and respect. Before marching toward Persia, Alexander gathered his troops and spoke to them with the heart of a visionary. He reminded them that they were not fighting to destroy, but to build a legacy. His soldiers, inspired by his sincerity, pledged their lives to him. They saw in their leader a man who would march first into danger, eat the same food as his men, and sleep on the same ground. That kind of humility made him more than a king. It made him a brother in arms. But Alexander also understood the importance of preparation. He spent months organizing his army, studying Persian defenses, and ensuring his men were trained to perfection. Every arrow, every shield, every route was planned with care. He knew that victory is not granted by luck, but earned through discipline. His attention to detail was extraordinary. No soldier went hungry, no horse was left untrained, and no strategy was left untested. As his army stood ready on the shores of the Hellespont, looking toward Asia, Alexander's heart was filled with both courage and gratitude. He dismounted his horse, walked to the water, and offered a silent prayer, thanking the Almighty for giving him the chance to fulfill his purpose. It was not arrogance that drove him forward, but faith that every challenge ahead was part of a divine plan, meant to test his character and strengthen his spirit. With that, Alexander crossed into Asia, a single step that marked the beginning of one of the greatest journeys in human history. The boy who once tamed a wild horse now rode to tame empires. The young king who once faced rebellion now faced destiny itself. And though the world would remember him as a conqueror, those who truly understood his heart knew he was something far greater, a seeker of unity, purpose, and eternal greatness. When Alexander and his army stepped onto the soil of Asia, it was more than just a military campaign. It was the beginning of a vision that would change history. Before him lay the mighty Persian Empire, vast and seemingly invincible, ruled by King Darius Roman III. The Persians outnumbered Alexander's forces by hundreds of thousands, yet he did not fear. He once told his generals, "Victory does not come from numbers, it comes from belief." His army was smaller, but it was bound together by unshakable loyalty, discipline, and faith in their leader's purpose. Alexander knew that the strength of the heart is greater than the size of any army. His first great test came at the Battle of Granicus River. It was early in his campaign, and the Persians were confident that they would crush the Macedonians quickly. The river was deep, and the enemy had the high ground. Every advantage was theirs. But Alexander refused to wait for better conditions. He saw hesitation as weakness. With his golden helmet gleaming in the sun, he led the charge himself, plunging into the river with his horse Bucephalus at the front. The sight of their king charging first inspired his men like fire spreading through dry grass. They followed him, shouting with one voice, and what seemed impossible turned into a moment of glory. The battle was fierce, but Alexander's strategy outmatched Persian arrogance. While the Persians expected a direct confrontation, he moved swiftly and struck at their weakest points, dividing their forces and overwhelming them. His personal courage on the battlefield became legendary. He fought alongside his men, his sword flashing, his commands echoing through the chaos. By the end of the battle, the Persians had been routed. Granicus was Alexander's first major victory, and it set the tone for everything that followed. After the battle, Alexander did something few conquerors would have done. He treated the Persian soldiers who had surrendered with dignity, allowing them to return home if they swore not to fight again. He buried both his own soldiers and the fallen Persians with honor, recognizing their bravery. This gesture shocked even his own men. It was mercy in the midst of victory. But Alexander understood that greatness is not only shown in how one fights, but in how one treats the defeated. He wanted the world to know that his war was not against people, but against tyranny and injustice. His next steps were guided by deep thought and preparation. He did not rush to destroy cities. Instead, he sought to win hearts. As he moved deeper into Asia Minor, he restored freedom to Greek cities that had been under Persian control. Wherever he went, he established justice, protected the poor, and respected local traditions. People who had once feared invaders began to see Alexander as a liberator. His fame spread far and wide, not only as a warrior but as a wise and fair ruler. But the Persians were not done. Darius Roman III was gathering a massive army to face Alexander directly. As the news reached the Macedonian camp, some of his generals advised retreat. Yet Alexander stood tall before his men and spoke with fire in his eyes. "We did not come this far to turn back," he said. "The Almighty gives victory to those who believe, not to those who doubt." His confidence was not arrogance, it was conviction. His soldiers, seeing his unwavering courage, renewed their faith and prepared for the next great battle. That next test came at the Battle of Issus. The Persians outnumbered Alexander's forces by nearly 10-1. The ground was rough, the winds fierce, and yet Alexander's mind was sharper than ever. He studied the terrain carefully and turned what looked like a disadvantage into a weapon. As the battle began, he led a direct attack on Darius's position, breaking through the heart of the Persian line. When Darius saw Alexander coming for him, he panicked and fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family, his treasures, and his pride. When the battle ended, Alexander found Darius's mother, wife, and children in his camp. Instead of harming them, he treated them with the utmost respect. He told them that they were now under his protection and would be treated as royalty. The family of his enemy called him a king greater than any king. This act of mercy echoed across the lands and won him admiration even among those he had defeated. Alexander proved once again that character and compassion are the true marks of greatness. Issus made Alexander a legend. He had faced overwhelming odds and prevailed through courage, intelligence, and faith. Yet, instead of celebrating, he continued moving forward. He knew that every victory carried a test, the test of humility. He reminded his men to remain disciplined and thankful, for pride could destroy what courage had built. His words were simple yet timeless. The moment you think victory is yours, it starts slipping away. As his banners flew high across Asia, Alexander's name became known throughout the ancient world. But what set him apart was not just his conquests, it was his purpose. He didn't fight to destroy nations. He fought to unite them under justice and wisdom. Every step he took, every battle he fought, was guided by something far greater than personal ambition. It was guided by destiny and the belief that one man, through courage and faith, could reshape the course of history forever. After the victory at Issus, Alexander's reputation spread like wildfire across Asia. He had defeated the seemingly invincible Persian king Darius III and shown the world that courage, faith, and wisdom could overcome any power built on arrogance. Yet Alexander did not rest. He knew that victory was not a destination, it was a responsibility. To him, success was not about conquest alone, but about maintaining discipline after triumph. The next stage of his journey was the siege of Tyre, a city that would test not just his army's strength, but his patience, endurance, and vision. Tyre was no ordinary city. It was built on an island surrounded by strong walls and guarded by a powerful navy. For centuries, it had resisted every invader. When Alexander requested entry into the city to offer sacrifices in their temple, the Tyrians arrogantly refused and mocked his authority. Many leaders would have responded with rage, but Alexander's mind worked differently. Instead of reacting emotionally, he began planning strategically. He decided that if the city was unreachable by sea, he would connect it to the mainland himself. That decision showed his greatest strength, the ability to turn the impossible into possible through sheer determination. For 7 long months, Alexander and his men worked day and night, building a massive causeway from the shore to the island city. Every stone, every piece of timber, was laid with relentless focus. The sea was rough, enemy arrows rained down, and many soldiers grew weary. Yet Alexander never lost hope. He encouraged his men with his presence, standing among them, helping carry stones, sharing their meals, and sleeping beside them in the cold nights. His leadership reminded everyone that a true king never commands from a throne. He fights among his people. The Tyrians, confident behind their walls, launched fierce attacks to destroy the causeway. They burned ships, killed workers, and sent fiery arrows into the construction. But Alexander adapted quickly, turning failures into lessons. He reinforced his navy, used taller siege towers, and expanded the causeway even wider. His resilience became a force of nature. The more resistance he faced, the stronger his resolve grew. He showed his men that persistence is the weapon of the strong, and no fortress is too high for those who refuse to quit. Finally, after months of struggle, the causeway reached the city walls. Alexander ordered a full-scale assault. The battle that followed was brutal. Arrows flew, fire burned, and the sea ran red with blood. But the Macedonian army, driven by their leader's unbreakable will, broke through Tyre's defenses. Alexander himself led the final charge, climbing the walls under heavy fire, his armor shining through the smoke. His bravery ignited his men like a flame in darkness, and when the city fell, it became a symbol across the ancient world, a reminder that faith and endurance can conquer what seems impossible. After the battle, Alexander demonstrated again his balance of justice and mercy. Though Tyre had resisted him fiercely, he spared many of its citizens and restored order quickly. He offered prayers of gratitude to the Almighty for granting victory, reminding his men that success belongs to the one who gives strength to the patient. For Alexander, the victory at Tyre was not about destroying an enemy. It was about proving to himself and the world that no obstacle could stop a man guided by purpose and discipline. This triumph was more than just military. It was deeply spiritual. As Alexander looked upon the completed causeway stretching from the mainland to the island, he saw it not only as a road of conquest, but as a bridge of faith. It symbolized the connection between persistence and divine help. His men saw it too. They realized that under his command they were not just fighting battles, but building history. Every hardship was shaping them into legends. After Tyre, Alexander's army felt invincible, but he never allowed pride to take root. He constantly reminded them to remain humble and thankful. In his nightly reflections, he often said, "We are only instruments of a higher will. The moment we forget that, we lose everything." This humility kept his leadership pure and his purpose strong. Even as kings and generals across Asia began to fear his name, Alexander's focus remained on uniting hearts, not just lands. His next move was toward Egypt, another mighty region under Persian control. Yet, instead of approaching it as a conqueror, Alexander came as a liberator. The Egyptians, weary of Persian rule, welcomed him with open arms. They saw in him not a foreign invader, but a wise leader who respected their traditions. He founded the great city of Alexandria, a center of knowledge, culture, and trade that would stand for centuries. This act showed the world that Alexander's dream was not domination, but harmony through wisdom and justice. By the end of his campaigns in Tyre and Egypt, Alexander had proven that leadership was not about how many lands one conquers, but how deeply one understands his purpose. His victories were not just written on maps, but engraved in the hearts of his people. The boy who once tamed a wild horse had now tamed nations through patience, intellect, and faith. And though the world saw him as a warrior, those closest to him knew the truth that Alexander's greatest conquest was not the cities he won, but the limitations he broke within himself. After the victories at Tyre and Egypt, Alexander stood on the edge of destiny once again. His path now led east, toward the heart of the Persian Empire, toward King Darius Roman III, and the final confrontation that would decide the future of two civilizations. The Persian king, humiliated by previous defeats, had gathered an army so vast that it seemed to stretch beyond the horizon. Thousands of chariots, war elephants, and soldiers covered the plains of Gaugamela. It was a sight meant to break the courage of any invader. But Alexander, standing before his men, was not shaken. His calm gaze held a quiet fire, the fire of faith and certainty. On the eve of the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander did not feast or boast as kings often do. Instead, he walked among his soldiers, speaking to them as brothers. He reminded them that courage does not come from numbers, but from belief in the purpose for which they fought. "We have come not to destroy," he told them, "but to bring justice to those who oppress the innocent." His words lifted the hearts of his warriors. They knew they followed not just a commander, but a man whose faith gave them strength greater than fear. The Persians waited on the open plain, confident in their numbers and their mighty chariots armed with blades. Darius believed that the battlefield itself favored him, but Alexander's brilliance was not in brute strength, it was in strategy. He studied the ground carefully, observed every weakness, and formed a plan that no one could predict. He arranged his troops in a flexible formation that could bend but never break, a design meant to trap arrogance within its own confidence. When dawn came, the two armies faced each other, tens of thousands against a smaller but disciplined force, led by a single vision. As the Persian chariots thundered forward, Alexander signaled his men to open narrow lanes. The deadly vehicles passed harmlessly through, their riders trapped and cut down from behind. What was meant to destroy the Macedonians now became their greatest advantage. Then Alexander struck where Darius least expected, a sudden charge straight toward the king himself. In that moment the battlefield turned into chaos. The Macedonian cavalry, led personally by Alexander, pierced through the Persian center like lightning. Darius, seeing his soldiers falling and his lines collapsing, lost his nerve once again. Fear overtook pride, and the king of the world fled his own army for the second time. The moment his men saw him retreat, their will broke. The mighty Persian army crumbled before the unshakable resolve of Alexander's warriors. When the battle ended, the world had changed. The Persian Empire, once the largest and most powerful on earth, was no more. Alexander had achieved what many thought impossible. Yet even in the glow of victory he did not boast. He looked across the battlefield at the fallen soldiers on both sides and felt the weight of what war truly costs. He ordered that both his men and the Persians be buried with honor, declaring, "Bravery belongs to all who fought with sincerity." Such words reflected his deep understanding that true greatness is not measured in conquest, but in compassion. Soon after, Alexander entered Babylon, the magnificent city of the East. The people, weary of Persian rule, welcomed him not as a destroyer, but as a deliverer. He restored their temples, respected their customs, and treated their priests with dignity. His humility astonished even his own generals. He understood that to rule people's hearts, one must first show respect for their beliefs, and so, where fear once ruled, peace began to grow. When he finally found the Persian king Darius dying after being betrayed by his own men, Alexander's reaction was not one of joy, but sorrow. He approached the fallen ruler and covered him with his own cloak, honoring him with the dignity due to a king. He sent his body back to Persia with full royal honors. To those around him, this act spoke volumes. It showed that Alexander was not merely conquering lands, but conquering pride, vengeance, and hatred. With Darius's death, Alexander became ruler of the greatest empire the world had ever known, yet his vision went beyond victory. He dreamed of uniting East and West, creating a world where wisdom, faith, and culture could live side by side. He encouraged learning, established centers of knowledge, and built cities that became crossroads of civilization. His empire was not built on fear, but on understanding. As the sun set on the fields of Gorgamla, Alexander knew that the Almighty had guided him through every trial. His success was not luck, nor mere strength. It was the reward of patience, vision, and unwavering belief. He proved to the world that even when the odds are impossible, victory belongs to those who prepare, persevere, and place their trust in a purpose greater than themselves. The boy who once tamed a wild horse had now tamed the pride of empires, not through arrogance, but through faith, discipline, and wisdom. After the victory at Gorgamla, Alexander stood at the peak of worldly power. He had conquered the greatest empire known to man, yet his heart remained restless. He did not see his success as the end, but as a test. The lands he ruled stretched from Greece to Babylon, from Egypt to Persia, yet Alexander's ambition was not for gold or fame. It was for knowledge, unity, and the fulfillment of destiny. Many rulers before him had fallen into pride after such triumphs, but Alexander understood that the true battle begins after victory, the battle against arrogance, greed, and self-deception. Instead of returning home to bask in glory, Alexander began his journey deeper into the East. His goal was not only to expand his empire, but to understand the vast world and the people within it. As he traveled through Persia, he noticed how many of the nobles lived in luxury while the poor suffered in silence. This deeply disturbed him. He made it clear that justice must apply equally to all, whether Greek or Persian, rich or poor. He replaced corrupt officials, rewarded honesty, and built systems to ensure that no one would be oppressed. This showed his belief that real strength lies in fairness, not fear. However, not everyone accepted his vision. Some of his own soldiers began to question him, wondering why their great king now honored the customs of the East. They failed to see that Alexander's purpose was greater than conquest. It was harmony. He wanted to bring together the best of all cultures, believing that diversity was a gift from the Almighty. When his men complained, he gathered them and spoke from his heart. "We are all travelers in this life. Our duty is not to divide, but to understand." His words softened their hearts, and once again loyalty replaced doubt. As he moved further into Persia, Alexander faced new challenges, not from armies, but from the weight of leadership. Managing such a vast empire required more than strategy. It demanded patience and balance. He often spent long nights in reflection, seeking wisdom through prayer and deep thought. He understood that a ruler must govern his soul before he can govern a kingdom. The more power he gained, the more he humbled himself before the Creator, recognizing that all victories come only by divine will. In Persia, Alexander came across many treasures, gold, jewels, and palaces that dazzled the eye. But he treated these riches as temporary. He distributed wealth among his soldiers and ordered the preservation of libraries, art, and ancient wisdom. And like conquerors who burned and plundered, Alexander built and protected. His heart was drawn more to knowledge than to luxury. He once said that he would rather discover a new truth than win another war, a reflection of his spiritual depth and hunger for enlightenment. One of his most profound actions was his decision to marry Roxana, a noblewoman from the Persian region of Bactria. This was not just a union of love, but a symbol of unity between East and West. Through this marriage, Alexander demonstrated that true leadership is not about ruling over others, but about bringing people together. Many historians later wrote that this act changed the way the world saw empires, not as chains of conquest, but as bridges of connection. Even as Alexander ruled over lands greater than any before him, he never stopped treating his soldiers as brothers. He would share meals with them, walk beside them in long marches, and listen to their struggles. This bond between leader and warrior was one of the secrets behind his success. His men would follow him into any danger, not because of fear, but because of love and respect. They saw in him a man who valued loyalty over titles and humility over pride. There were moments of exhaustion, moments when even Alexander questioned how far his journey should go. But every time he felt doubt, he reminded himself of his purpose, that his mission was not about personal gain, but about fulfilling what destiny had written for him. He believed that every challenge was a test from the Almighty, meant to strengthen his spirit, and so he pressed forward not as a conqueror of lands, but as a seeker of meaning. His respect for knowledge grew even stronger during this period. In every new land he entered, Alexander would gather scholars, scientists, and philosophers to learn about their discoveries. He encouraged the exchange of ideas between Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and Indians, planting the seeds of what would later become centuries of learning and progress. His vision was not limited by geography. It stretched to the hearts and minds of people across the world. By the time Alexander's army reached the edges of India, he had achieved something greater than empire. He had shown that true power does not come from the sword, but from the mind and the soul. His journey through Persia taught him that greatness is not in ruling others, but in uplifting them. He proved that with discipline, justice, and faith, even a mortal man can shape eternity. Though the world called him Alexander the Great, he remained in his heart a servant of purpose, a man who saw victory not as a crown, but as a responsibility before the Almighty. After his victories in Persia, Alexander faced the defining challenge of his life, the campaign into India. This was not just another war. It was the ultimate test of his strength, patience, and belief in destiny. The journey through the mountains and rivers of the East was brutal. His soldiers were exhausted, their armor rusted from rain, and their morale shaken by endless battles. Yet Alexander never wavered. His spirit burned with the same fire that had carried him through every storm. He reminded his army that every hardship was a step closer to greatness, that endurance was the crown of warriors. He did not rule them through fear, but through faith that they had been chosen for something extraordinary. When Alexander reached the mighty river Hydaspes, he encountered King Porus, a warrior known for his bravery and noble heart. Porus was no ordinary enemy. He commanded a powerful army with war elephants and fierce soldiers who fought with discipline and pride. Most kings would have sought peace before facing such might, but Alexander saw in Porus not just a rival, but a mirror, another man of vision and courage. The two armies clashed in one of the most legendary battles in history. Thunder roared, rain poured, and the battlefield turned to mud. Yet Alexander fought with a calm fury that inspired every man beside him. The elephants of Porus charged forward, causing chaos in the Macedonian ranks. But Alexander, using his unmatched strategy, outmaneuvered them. He ordered his troops to divide and surround the enemy, striking from all sides like the tightening grip of destiny itself. The battle was fierce, and many brave men fell that day, but Alexander's determination never cracked. When his horse Bucephalus, his lifelong companion, was struck down in battle, Alexander's heart ached, yet his resolve only grew stronger. He fought harder not for glory, but to honor every life lost under his command. When victory finally came, Alexander stood face to face with Porus. The defeated king was brought before him, wounded yet proud, refusing to beg for mercy. Alexander asked him how he wished to be treated, and Porus replied, "As a king." Those words struck deep into Alexander's heart. He saw in Porus not an enemy, but a reflection of the same noble fire that guided his own life. Instead of enslaving him, Alexander restored Porus to his throne, giving him even more land and respect. That act of honor shocked the world. It proved that Alexander's greatness was not measured by how many he defeated, but by how he treated those he conquered. The battle with Porus transformed Alexander's understanding of power. He began to see that true strength lies not in destruction, but in dignity. He realized that victory over others is temporary, but victory over one's ego lasts forever. His soldiers witnessed this and were moved, understanding that their king was not just a conqueror, he was a man of wisdom guided by moral purpose. This event marked a turning point in his journey, showing that mercy is not weakness, it is the highest form of control. After the battle, Alexander ordered his men to bury the fallen with respect, both Greek and Indian alike. He treated the battlefield not as a place of triumph, but as sacred ground. He built monuments to honor bravery, not just his own, but that of his enemies. This act of fairness strengthened his reputation across lands. People began to see him not as an invader, but as a leader who valued justice and honor. In this way, his empire expanded not only through force, but through trust and respect. The march deeper into India revealed to Alexander a world of spiritual depth and ancient wisdom. He met scholars, sages, and philosophers who spoke of life beyond material conquest, of the soul, destiny, and the divine purpose of man. These teachings fascinated him. He realized that even after conquering half the known world, there were still truths he had yet to discover. This curiosity became the light that guided his final campaigns, showing that the pursuit of knowledge is a greater conquest than the pursuit of land. Yet his soldiers grew weary. They longed to return home, tired of the endless battles and foreign lands. When they refused to march further, Alexander did not punish them. Instead, he stood before them and spoke from his heart. He reminded them of the impossible mountains they had crossed, the mighty empires they had toppled, and the honor they had earned. But he also told them that their journey had a purpose beyond conquest, that they were part of a story written by fate. His compassion rekindled their loyalty, for even in command he remained human, a man who understood the burdens of those who followed him. As Alexander began the journey back from India, he carried not just treasures or maps of new lands, but lessons. He had learned that empire is fleeting, but legacy is eternal. His victories had shown him that leadership is not about domination, but about vision, a vision that uplifts others, brings unity, and respects the Creator's design. The encounter with Porus and the wisdom of India deepened his soul, shaping him into more than a conqueror. He became a bridge between worlds, between power and mercy, between ambition and purpose. The campaign in India became the final masterpiece of his life, not because it expanded his empire, but because it expanded his understanding of what it means to be great. He left behind not just a map of conquest, but a message that greatness is achieved not through oppression, but through honor, not through pride, but through humility, and not through destruction, but through understanding. And so, from the rivers of India to the deserts of Babylon, Alexander's name echoed as a symbol of courage, vision, and divine purpose. A king who conquered the world but never forgot the meaning of his soul. After returning from his long campaign in India, Alexander the Great faced one of the most challenging phases of his life. The fire of conquest still burned within him, but his body and spirit were tired. His army, once unstoppable, was now worn by years of marching through deserts, jungles, and rivers. Yet Alexander refused to rest in comfort. He believed that greatness was not something achieved once. It had to be maintained through discipline, vision, and service to a higher purpose. His empire stretched from Greece to the edges of Asia, yet he remained restless, always seeking to strengthen unity among his people. He understood that winning wars was easier than ruling peacefully. Many leaders have conquered through the sword, but few have conquered the hearts of men. Alexander began focusing on building bridges between different nations under his rule. He encouraged his soldiers to marry local women, uniting cultures that were once enemies. He adopted certain customs of the lands he conquered not to imitate them, but to show respect. This was not a sign of weakness, but wisdom. He wanted his empire to stand on understanding, not fear. His belief was simple: if people feel respected, they will remain loyal. Alexander also worked to establish centers of learning across his empire. He ordered the creation of cities like Alexandria in Egypt that would become places where knowledge and trade flourished. These cities were not just military bases. They were symbols of enlightenment. Scholars, traders, and travelers from distant lands gathered there, exchanging ideas that shaped generations to come. His dream was not to be remembered as a man who destroyed kingdoms, but as one who built civilizations. His vision went beyond power. It was about legacy. However, leadership often invites envy. Within his army and court, some began to whisper against him. They misunderstood his desire for unity as pride. They accused him of forgetting his roots, of becoming too much like the foreign kings he had defeated. But Alexander did not waver. He reminded them that his mission was greater than pride or blood. It was about destiny. He said, "A true king belongs not to one land, but to all those who seek peace and truth." These words reflected the depth of his wisdom and his understanding of humanity. As he traveled back through Babylon, Alexander began to feel the heavy burden of his journey. Years of battles had taken their toll. Yet even in his weakened state, his mind was sharp. He would walk among his men, speak with them personally, listen to their concerns, and reward their loyalty. His ability to connect with his soldiers made him not just a commander, but a leader who inspired devotion. He believed that a leader must never rise so high that he forgets the people who lifted him there. One of the most remarkable qualities Alexander displayed in these final years was his humility. Despite ruling over the greatest empire of his time, he never saw himself as a god, only as a servant of divine purpose. He often said that his victories were not his own, but a trust given to him by the Almighty. This belief kept his heart grounded even as his name reached the corners of the known world. His character stood as a reminder that true greatness is always tied to gratitude and responsibility. As his health declined, many urged him to rest, but Alexander refused. He wanted to see every part of his empire flourish. He continued planning new roads, trade routes, and cities. He saw his empire not as a possession, but as a living creation that needed guidance and structure. His ambition was not born of greed, but of vision. He wanted the people of every nation, from the Greeks to the Persians, from the Egyptians to the Indians, to share in peace and progress. When illness finally struck him down, Alexander faced it with courage. He did not cry out in fear or regret. Instead, he gathered his generals and spoke to them of unity. He told them that if they stood divided, the empire would fall, but if they remained brothers, their legacy would last forever. Even in his final moments, he was not concerned about his throne, but about his people. This selflessness proved that his true power was not his sword, but his heart. As word spread of his illness, soldiers from all parts of his empire came to see him one last time. Thousands passed by his bed, weeping not for a king, but for a leader who had shared their struggles. He had eaten what they ate, marched where they marched, and bled as they bled. In those final hours, Alexander looked upon them with pride, knowing that his dream had taken root in their hearts. When he finally breathed his last, the world fell silent. He was only 32, yet he had achieved what most could not in lifetimes. But Alexander's death did not mark an end. It marked the beginning of a legend. His story became a lesson in courage, wisdom, and humility. He proved that while empires may fade, the spirit of a leader who serves with vision and faith never dies. His life stood as a testament that the greatest conquests are not of land or power, but of the soul. After the death of Alexander the Great, the world mourned as if the light of an era had gone out. His empire stretched across continents, but what remained more powerful than his territories was the spirit he had left behind. His soldiers, his generals, and even the people he had once conquered now looked back on his life as something larger than war. He had been more than a king. He was a visionary, a man who believed that humanity could be united under respect, justice, and honor. The loss of such a leader created a void that no crown could ever fill. The generals who had marched beside him, men who had fought countless battles and shared his victories, were now faced with the question, how do you lead after following someone like Alexander? He had taught them not just tactics of war, but the ethics of leadership. Yet without his guidance, their hearts grew uncertain. Ambition began to replace unity. Some wanted to claim the throne, others sought to protect what he had built. The empire he left behind was vast, but fragile, because it was tied together by his vision, not by greed. His passing tested everything he had taught them. As news spread across the lands from Greece to Egypt, from Babylon to India, people gathered in mourning. Temples, cities, and villages all held prayers for the young king who had ruled the world but never ruled with cruelty. Merchants who had once feared his armies now spoke of his fairness. Scholars who had studied in his cities called him a protector of wisdom. Even those who had opposed him in battle, like the followers of King Porus, honored him as a man who fought with dignity. This rare unity of respect among former enemies showed that Alexander's greatness was not built on destruction. It was built on justice and compassion. Many who had seen him in person could never forget his presence. They spoke of his sharp eyes that saw both opportunity and danger before anyone else. They recalled his voice that could command thousands but comfort one. They remembered how he would lead from the front, covered in dust and sweat, refusing any comfort that his men did not have. That humility had made him beloved, even among those who feared his strength. His life became an example of what true leadership looks like, power balanced with humanity. As years passed, the legend of Alexander began to take on a sacred tone. Storytellers, poets, and philosophers spread his tales across generations. They spoke not only of his victories, but of his heart, the way he honored King Porus, the way he respected scholars, the way he sought truth beyond the material world. His story was no longer just about conquests. It became a lesson about faith, destiny, and purpose. In every corner of the lands he touched, parents told their children about the man who dreamed of unity when the world knew only division. Even in distant lands beyond the borders of his empire, his influence continued. Trade routes that he opened connected cultures for centuries. The cities he built became centers of learning and progress. His policies of tolerance between different peoples inspired future rulers to lead with wisdom instead of tyranny. His empire might have been divided after his death, but his principles of courage, fairness, and vision continued to shape history. The seeds he planted in knowledge, culture, and morality grew long after his body had turned to dust. But perhaps the most profound part of Alexander's legacy was the way he showed the limits of human ambition. Despite all his achievements, he left this world with empty hands. His death reminded the world that no matter how powerful a person becomes, all must return to their Creator. This truth gave his story a moral depth. People realized that the pursuit of greatness should not be for pride or domination, but to serve a higher purpose. His life became a reflection of the divine balance between power and humility, strength and surrender. Among his followers, some began to believe that Alexander's journey was not merely historical, but spiritual. They saw his conquests as metaphors for conquering the self, overcoming fear, pride, and doubt. To them, his real victory was not over Persia or India, but over weakness, laziness, and ignorance. They began to say Alexander conquered the world because he first conquered himself. This saying became a timeless truth for all who sought greatness with integrity. Generations later, his story inspired countless leaders, warriors, and thinkers. Even in lands far away, like Europe and beyond, his name became a symbol of courage and destiny. Many studied his life not to imitate his wars, but to understand his vision, his ability to dream beyond limits, to see possibilities where others saw barriers. He became an eternal reminder that history is shaped not by those who desire control, but by those who believe in divine purpose and act upon it with discipline. And so Alexander's story became more than a tale of empire. It became a light for the generations that followed. His courage taught the world that no dream is too big when pursued with faith. His humility reminded us that power is a responsibility, not a privilege. His legacy whispered across time, "Greatness is not in the sword, but in the spirit." And as his story continues to be told, his name lives not in monuments or empires, but in the hearts of all who seek to rise with purpose, lead with wisdom, and serve with sincerity. As time moved forward, centuries passed, and the dust of Alexander's empire settled into the soil of history. But his story refused to die. Kings rose and fell, cities were built and destroyed, yet the name of Alexander the Great continued to echo across generations. What made him unforgettable was not just the size of his empire, but the depth of his vision. He was remembered as a man who believed that boundaries were only illusions, that courage could rewrite destiny, and that leadership was a divine trust, not a personal throne. His legacy became a guiding light for rulers and dreamers alike. In every age, when people spoke of greatness, they compared it to Alexander's fire. Scholars studied his strategies, philosophers pondered his beliefs, and poets wrote about his courage. But behind the glory there was something even more powerful: his humanity. He had faced exhaustion, betrayal, and loss, yet he had never surrendered to despair. His victories were not gifts of fortune, but the results of unshakable determination. This made his story timeless, because every person who struggled against odds could see a piece of themselves in his journey. As historians preserved his legacy, they began to understand that Alexander's mission had never been only about ruling lands. He had sought to bring the world together under knowledge, justice, and respect. He wanted to dissolve the walls between nations and tribes, teaching that all people, regardless of their origin, were part of the same human story. This idea was revolutionary for its time. It showed that even in the heart of conquest, his greater purpose was unity, a purpose that reflected moral strength rather than worldly ambition. In the lands where his empire once stood, the traces of his influence remained visible. Cities he founded still bore his name. Roads he built became the arteries of trade and connection. The ideas of tolerance and wisdom that he promoted continued to shape societies for generations. His leadership inspired explorers, scientists, and reformers to push the boundaries of the possible. His name became a symbol of endless curiosity and boundless courage. Even when people disagreed about his methods, they could not deny his impact. For the people of later centuries, Alexander became more than a historical figure. He became a symbol of excellence, of striving for greatness with faith and purpose. His life reminded the world that victory is never achieved without sacrifice, and that power must always be guided by principle. He had every reason to become arrogant, yet he remained humble in the face of divine truth. He never claimed immortality, but his legacy achieved it for him. He showed that the key to eternal remembrance lies in how you serve, not just in how you rule. In his story, leaders found lessons on justice and responsibility. Warriors found lessons on courage and endurance, and thinkers found lessons on vision and knowledge. Alexander's journey spoke to every heart that desired to make an impact without losing moral grounding. He proved that leadership is not inherited by birth. It is earned through struggle, shaped by discipline, and sustained by sincerity. His life became a reminder that true greatness requires balance, strength with humility, ambition with mercy, and vision with wisdom. As empires faded into memory, Alexander's tale continued to inspire. His name was invoked by teachers to awaken courage in their students, by soldiers to remind them of honor, and by dreamers to fuel their purpose. His empire no longer existed on maps, but his influence existed in minds. The way he led, the way he treated others, and the way he pursued knowledge became lessons written not on stone tablets, but on human hearts. He became proof that legacy is not built on land or titles. It is built on the character you leave behind. Even in modern times, his story remains relevant. People still quote his words, still study his campaigns, still learn from his mistakes and his wisdom. His journey reminds humanity that every era needs leaders who dream beyond themselves, who build bridges instead of walls, who rise after defeat, and who serve with humility. Alexander's life was proof that courage without morality is destruction, but courage guided by moral purpose is greatness. In every person's life, there comes a moment when they face their own battlefield, not with swords, but with choices, fears, and trials. Alexander's story teaches that those who fight their inner battles with faith, patience, and integrity become conquerors in the truest sense. His empire may have vanished, but his message endures. The real victory lies in conquering the self. It is the heart, not the sword, that defines the worth of a king. And so, as history continues to move forward, the legend of Alexander the Great stands unshaken. He remains the timeless example of a man who dreamed fearlessly, led selflessly, and served with wisdom. His victories built an empire, but his character built a legacy. From the mountains of Macedonia to the rivers of India, his name whispers a truth that never fades, that the greatest empires are not made of stone and gold, but of courage, honor, and the will to rise again after every fall. When Alexander finally laid down his sword, the world realized something profound. His empire was not his greatest achievement. His true empire lived within the hearts of men who learned from his courage, his humility, and his unwavering faith in purpose. He taught the world that greatness is not about how long you live, but about how deeply you impact the lives around you. The sands of time buried his castles, but not his character. His legacy remains a reminder that the greatest conquest is not over kingdoms or armies. It is the conquest of the soul. So, whenever you feel small, lost, or uncertain, remember the boy who became a legend, not because he ruled the world, but because he refused to let the world rule him.